Chapter 17 of Narrative of the Life of David Crockett of the State of Tennessee. I have heretofore informed the reader that I had determined to run this race to see what effect the price of cotton could have again on it. I now had Colonel Alexander to run against once more, and also General William Arnold. I had difficulties enough to fight against this time, as everyone will suppose, for I had no money and a very bad prospect, so far as I knowed, of getting any to help me along. I had, however, a good friend who sent for me to come and see him. I went, and he was good enough to offer me some money to help me out. I borrowed as much as I thought I needed at the start and went ahead. My friend also had a good deal of business about over the district at the different courts, and if he now and then slipped in a good word for me, it is nobody's business. We frequently met at different places, and, as he thought I needed, he would occasionally hand me a little more cash, so I was able to buy a little of the creature, to put my friends in a good humor, as well as the other gentlemen, for they all treat in that country. Not to get elected, of course, for that would be against the law, but just, as I before said, to make themselves and their friends feel they're keeping a little. Nobody ever did know how I got money to get along on, till after the election was over and I had beat my competitors 2,748 votes. Even the price of cotton couldn't save my friend Alec this time. My rich friend, who had been so good to me in the way of money, now sent for me and loaned me $100 and told me to go ahead, that amount would bear my expenses to Congress, and I must then shift for myself. I came on to Washington and drawed $250 and purchased with it a check on the bank at Nashville and enclosed it to my friend. And I may say, in truth, I sent this money with a mighty good will, for I reckon nobody in this world loves a friend better than me, or remembers a kindness longer. I have now given the close of the election, but I have skipped entirely over the canvass, of which I will say a very few things in this place, as I know very well how to tell the truth, but not much about placing them in book order, so as to please critics. Colonel Alexander was a very clever fellow, and principal surveyor at that time, so much for one of the men I had to run against. My other competitor was a major general in the militia, and an attorney general at the law, and quite a smart, clever man also. And so it will be seen I had war work as well as law trick to stand up under. Taking both together, they make a pretty considerable of a load for any one man to carry. But for war claims, I consider myself behind no man except the government, and mighty little, if any, behind him. But this the people will have to determine hereafter, as I reckon it won't do to quit the work of reform and retrenchment yet for a spell. But my two competitors seemed some little afraid of the influence of each other, but not to think of me in their way at all. They, therefore, were generally working against each other, while I was going ahead for myself, and mixing among the people in the best way I could. I was as cunning as a little red fox, and wouldn't risk my tail in a committal trap. I found the sign was good almost everywhere I went. On one occasion, while we were in the eastern counties of the district, it happened that we all had to make a speech, and it fell on me to make the first one. I did so after my manner, and it turned pretty much on the old saying, "A short horse is soon curried," as I spoke not very long. Colonel Alexander followed me, and then General Arnold come on. The general took much pains to reply to Alexander, but didn't so much as let on that there was any such candidate as myself at all. He had been speaking for a considerable time when a large flock of guinea fowls came very near to where he was and set up the most unmerciful chattering that ever was heard, for they are a noisy little brood anyway. They so confused the general that he made a stop and requested that they might be driven away. I let him finish his speech, and then walking up to him, said aloud, "Well, Colonel, You are the first man I ever saw that understood the language of fowls." I told him that he had not had the politeness to name me in his speech, and that when my little friends, the guinea fowls, had come up and began to holler, "Crockett, Crockett, Crockett," he had been ungenerous enough to stop and drive them all away. This raised a universal shout among the people for me, and the general seemed mighty bad plagued. But he got more plagued than this at the polls in August, as I have stated before. This election was in 1827, and I can say, on my conscience, that I was, without disguise, the friend and supporter of General Jackson, upon his principles as he laid them down and as I understood them before his election as president. During my 2 first sessions in Congress, Mr. Adams was president, and I worked along with what was called the Jackson party pretty well. I was re-elected to Congress in 1829 by an overwhelming majority, and soon after the commencement of this second term I saw, or thought I did, that it was expected of me that I was to bow to the name of Andrew Jackson and follow him in all his motions and mindings and turnings, even at the expense of my conscience and judgment. Such a thing was new to me, and a total stranger to my principles. I knowed well enough, though, that if I didn't hurrah for his name, the hue and cry was to be raised against me, and I was to be sacrificed if possible. His famous, or rather I should say his infamous, Indian bill was brought forward, and I opposed it from the purest motives in the world. Several of my colleagues got around me and told me how well they loved me and that I was ruining myself. They said this was a favorite measure of the president, and I ought to go for it. I told them I believed it was a wicked, unjust measure, and that I should go against it, let the cost to myself be what it might. That I was willing to go with General Jackson in everything that I believed was honest and right, but, further than this, I wouldn't go for him or any other man in the whole creation, that I would sooner be honestly and politically damned than hypocritically immortalized. I had been elected by a majority of 3,585 votes, and I believed they were honest men and wouldn't want me to vote for any unjust notion, to please Jackson or anyone else. At any rate, I was of age and was determined to trust them. I voted against this Indian bill, and my conscience yet tells me that I gave a good, honest vote, and one that I believe will not make me ashamed in the day of judgment. I served out my term, and though many amusing things happened, I am not disposed to swell my narrative by inserting them. When it closed, and I returned home, I found the storm had raised against me sure enough, and it was echoed from side to side and from end to end of my district that I had turned against Jackson. This was considered the unpardonable sin. I was hunted down like a wild varmint, and in this hunt every little newspaper in the district and every little pin-hook lawyer was engaged. Indeed, they were ready to print any and everything that the ingenuity of man could invent against me. Each editor was furnished with the journals of Congress from headquarters, and hunted out every vote I had missed in 4 sessions, whether from sickness or not, no matter, and each one was charged against me at $8. In all, I had missed about 70 votes, which they made amount to $560, and they contended I had swindled the government out of this sum, as I had received my pay as other members do. I was now again a candidate in 1830, while all the attempts were making against me, and every one of these little papers kept up a constant war on me, fighting with every scurrilous report they could catch. Overall, I should have been elected, if it hadn't been that but a few weeks before the election, the little 4-pence halfpenny limbs of the law fell on a plan to defeat me, which had the desired effect. They agreed to spread out over the district and make appointments for me to speak, almost everywhere, to clear up the Jackson question. They would give me no notice of these appointments, and the people would meet in great crowds to hear what excuse Crockett had to make for quitting Jackson. But instead of Crockett's being there, this small fry of lawyers would be there, with their saddlebags full of the little newspapers and their journals of Congress, and would get up and speak and read their scurrilous attacks on me, and would then tell the people that I was afraid to attend, and in this way would turn many against me. All this intrigue was kept a profound secret from me till it was too late to counteract it, and when the election came, I had a majority in 17 counties, putting all their votes together, but the 18th beat me, and so I was left out of Congress during those 2 years. The people of my district were induced by these tricks to take a stay on me for that time, but they have since found out that they were imposed on, and on reconsidering my case have reversed that decision, which, as the Dutchman said, is a fair ding as ever was. When I last declared myself a candidate, I knew that the district would be divided by the legislature before the election would come on, and I moreover knew that from the geographical situation of the country, the county of Madison, which was very strong, and which was the county that had given the majority that had beat me in the former race, should be left off from my district. But when the legislature met, as I have been informed, and I have no doubt of the fact, Mr. Fitzgerald, my competitor, went up and informed his friends in that body that if Madison County was left off, he wouldn't run, for that Crockett could beat Jackson himself in those parts in any way they could fix it. The liberal legislature, you know, of course, gave him that county, and it is too clear to admit of dispute that it was done to make a mash of me. In order to make my district in this way, they had to form the southern district of a string of counties around 3 sides of mine, or very nearly so. Had my old district been properly divided, it would have made 2 nice ones, in convenient nice form. But, as it is, they are certainly the most unreasonably laid off of any in the state, or perhaps in the nation, or even in the teetotal creation. However, when the election came on, the people of the district, and of Madison County among the rest, seemed disposed to prove to Mr. Fitzgerald and the Jackson legislature that they were not to be transferred like hogs and horses and cattle in the market, and they determined that I shouldn't be broke down, though I had to carry Jackson and the enemies of the bank and the legislative works all at once. I had Mr. Fitzgerald, it is true, for my open competitor, but he was helped along by all his little lawyers again, headed by Old Blackhawk, as he is sometimes called, alias Adam Huntsman, with all his talents for writing chronicles and such like foolish stuff. But one good thing was, and I must record it, the papers in the district were now beginning to say, fair play a little, and they would publish on both sides of the question. The contest was a warm one, and the battle well fought, but I gained the day, and the Jackson horse was left a little behind. When the polls were compared, it turned out I had beat Fitz just 202 votes, having made a mash of all their intrigues. After all this, the reader will perceive that I am now here in Congress, this 28th day of January, in the year of our Lord 1834, and that, what is more agreeable to my feelings as a freeman, I am at liberty to vote as my conscience and judgment dictates to be right, without the yoke of any party on me, or the driver at my heels, with his whip in hand commanding me to gee wo-ha, just at his pleasure. Look at my arms, you will find no party handcuff on them. Look at my neck, you will not find there any collar with the engraving, My Dog, Andrew Jackson. But you will find me standing up to my rack as the people's faithful representative and the public's most obedient, very humble servant, David Crockett. End of Chapter 17. End of Narrative of the Life of David Crockett of the State of Tennessee by David Crockett.